Smartphones in today's world have created a gap in our lives which they sit. Our smartphones give us the ability to communicate with friends and loved ones, the link to the outside world via the internet, and the overall ability to seek knowledge. Smartphones have been a game changer in our lives. No longer do we have to wait for mail from the post office. No, now we can access our email through the touch of a button. Even a decade ago, we had to wait to get to a computer to check our email. Even then, that seemed a little easier. As well, we can now access maps, music, and weather. Our smartphones have now become an integral part of our lives.
Taking some time off for a trip to Germany for a few days, neither of us had any idea the impact smartphones had in our daily lives. We found out immediately the moment we landed. While knowing that we were not able to use our smartphones, it was made clear to us by the searching icon in the spot where the bar should be. A slight panic grew amongst us. I mean, how were we going to let people know that we made it safely? And how were we going to contact our liaison in Germany? After a nice deep breath, we stopped, and then we began on our trip. We tried to navigate through the airport, and by all means, this was no small task that we were trying to take on.
My father had, years before, done a tour in the army in Germany. Knowing that this topic was going to be something that which we wanted to do our project on, I decided to take notes, pictures, and videos of the obstacles that we found and see if in 1972 my father had similar issues. I sat down with my father to ask him some questions regarding his life and times abroad, and to try and see if he too experienced similar problems while going on his tour.
While the obvious communication barriers, by simply taking the phone out of the equation, shouldn't amount to much, a smartphone as it is today has only been with us for the past 8 or 9 years. So knowing this, a device has become more than just a device in the modern American life. According to an online poll, 7 out of 10 Americans over the age of 16 have what is considered a smartphone. So 70% in this demographic have a device in America.
When my father and I sat down to speak, he was somewhat aghast that we would be doing an interview pertaining to smartphones. My father himself does have a smartphone, to which he tries to use to the best of his ability. In 1972, however, there was no such thing. I started out my inquiry by asking him what it was like to be in a different country with little means of communication. My father said in his low baritone voice, "I guess times were different. There weren't too many people that I needed to communicate with." And I could see that. I could imagine that the usage of the smartphone gave us the ability to communicate with more people than in 1972. I set up after we landed to call Alex. He was our point of contact in country. And when I got to the payphone with money in hand, I stared at the phone as if it would give me some kind of answer in English about how we would use it. After some time and a few glances at my smartphone, praying somehow it would magically turn on, a local woman asked me if I needed some help. In her best possible English, she tried to explain how to use what she felt was a simple device. I tried what she told me, and after a few do-overs and wrong numbers, I was able to finally place a call and reach Alex.
We, though, had smartphones. However, without the connection to any network, they were more like bricks in our hands than any communication device. Simple tasks that, at home, required the touch of a button or a few flicks of the finger now required much more thought. These smartphones were like our drug, and we, the addicts, were going through withdrawals. McLuhan, in his book, stabbed a sharp knife into the reader's image of technology. With that, he gave a glimpse into the reader of what the ever-expanding technology that was of his time. It could pose for Americans and others of the world for years to come. I think upon first reading some of McLuhan's work, neither of us gave it much thought to his views.
It does seem funny, though, midway into my interview, that McLuhan was on my mind. Could this radical man from so many years ago really have a point in all this? McLuhan was even somewhat outdated in 1972, when my father used his primitive methods to carry on his adventure through Germany. The phone then was just that. It was a phone, and nowhere near the capable device that we have today. Now, this capable device that we have restructured the way that we do even the most basic of tasks, i.e. banking, emails, calendars. No, now more than ever, one thing controls so many aspects of the way that we live.
Our first night of the trip was spent under the supervision of our friends. Our phones then were little more than cameras for this part of the trip. We did know, though, the inevitable was bound to happen. We would lose our German companions, and it would be just us, alone. We know that we'd be on our own. We tried our hardest to use the other tools and go about our travels. However, they seemed almost foreign to us. In the last 8 or 9 years of having smartphones, it made us almost incapable of functioning without them. Technology as it is today couldn't have been imagined in its present state 50 years ago. Even 10 years ago, the layman couldn't have imagined the speed at which we communicate today.
My father's time in Germany could have been made a lot easier with the world network in which we have now. However, he didn't have the same resources. No, he relied on maps and landlines. He also relied on the kindness of strangers to point him in the right direction. So we caved in. We conceded defeat. As so many travelers have done before us, we got a pay-for-minute phone. We had to. I mean, in case we lost each other, we had to have some means of communication between us.
We're all yours.
Yes.
What do you think it is like to not have a phone in Europe?
What do I think that it's like? Well, what I know that it's like is it's probably one of the hardest things that you can have to do. I don't know if the phone is the evil that created itself or that we have created the phone, but not having a phone, wait, I'm afraid to go to the bathroom by myself and get left. I don't speak Dutch, I don't speak German, and their English isn't as good as I thought it was.
I asked my father that same question. You know, what would you do if you were separated from your group in 1972? My father laughed at most of his response. He said, "We had watches in those days." Baffled, I asked for more insight. My father went on to say that we would designate a point at which we all knew and we would meet there. Duh.
Looking further into the peril that we faced, I thought, is the smartphone then the reason why we had so much trouble in trying to live without it? We as a group assessed, yeah, it is. The smartphone itself created a void in which it fills. Our trip led us from Germany to Holland. In doing so, we were forced to drive the Autobahn, which is a network of highways that link Germany and all its surrounding countries. The vehicle that we had was obviously from a German rental car company. So yes, the only means of navigation to us was from the vehicle itself. Our drop phones and our smartphones were pretty much useless because our drop phones only had voice and text and we could not use our smartphones. And we were just so lucky to have our navigation, which was all in German. This made it extremely difficult to use. We did have a moment of instruction from our German host Alex, though.
It's very easy, yeah? Navigation, you just hit nav, okay? And then you get this screen, okay? Land means, of course, country, yeah? Ort, this is postal code, and this is city, so you just enter the city. Straße is street, okay? You just enter the street, and that's the number, obviously. Sonderziel means a special, whatever, if you're looking for a hotel or something, you can just enter the city and then go to Sonderziel and look for hotel. Hotel is hotel. And Zielführung starten means start. Means what? Start. Start. Yeah.
Starting.
All that. Let's do the first word. Okay?
Okay.
We were then stuck using signs and roadside maps while we tried to come to terms with the German navigation system. Finally, we made it to the Netherlands. There, we were able to use our smartphones in our hotel. Some of our family and our loved ones were shocked at our inability to rapidly communicate back home. In fact, some were ready to call the consulate in order to find us. Our families were almost shocked that we didn't have Wi-Fi every step of the way.
In our 48-hour period in Holland, we had approximately 8 hours with our phones. And these short hours, I myself gave up much needed sleep in order to communicate with those back home. Along with that, using that vital apps that had since been longing to our trip. The rock that had been in my pocket now was something that I could use. My father made it clear that he, in his day, didn't communicate back with the frequency of which we do today. In his day, letters were the most frequent form of communication. He said, "I would write a few letters every now and then and receive about the same. It was a waiting game, but the joy of receiving a letter was worth the wait."
Some may say the lack of our cell phones and smartphones wasn't that bad, or that we could have gotten along just fine without them. I tell those people no. Upon leaving the Netherlands, we decided to reflect on the lack of our smartphones.
Okay, so anyways, so what our theory is that once you go and you leave and you have no more phones, since they're all attached to our hips, that things just get a little more crazy. So they got crazy enough to the point, and we were lacking our phones, that we actually had to buy these, which are our drop phones. And no, we're not drug dealers, but we needed to get in contact with each other. It's way too complicated. We met people from all over the world, Great Britain, Venezuela, Holland, Deutschland, the Netherlands, and the synopsis that we've come to is that you need a phone for us.
We made it back to Germany and again had a chaperone. We then had become less quote-unquote needy for those smartphones. Even though there were still times in which we looked at our smartphones for the answer, still having none, we were almost okay with it.
Our phones today have become such a part of our lives that they are now hard to separate ourselves from. The smartphone fills a void that it itself created. Now, for us to go without it, especially while abroad, is extremely difficult. Maybe 40 years ago, when this void wasn't there, things were simpler. However, that isn't the case today. Today, we need these phones to save our brains from having to work hard and have to use them more today.
Genuinely, we missed having the quote-unquote answer in our hands. Today, our phones have become so much more to us than our fathers before. My father's ended our talk in speaking some very poignant words. He said, "My time in Germany was definitely difficult at first. Yet, as I spent more and more time, I was able to use my normal means of navigation and communication that I was used to. I didn't need Pandora because I had records. I didn't need text messaging. I had letters. And on other interpersonal means of communication. Lastly, if I needed to make a phone call, I dropped a dime in a phone, or a mark as they called it in Germany, and I called and I wrote down telephone numbers. That's another thing. And I know my friends by sight, not through some status update.